My name is Jose Caso, and I'm the product marketing manager from Lanza. And with us is also Andrew Vaiciunas, senior engineer.
Hi there, this is Andrew here.
Great. So let's get started. So of the topics we're going to talk today, we're going to talk of the normal challenges and solutions we normally have during modernization processes. And very first question is, why modernize? And we will also talk about the techniques and strategies and the tips and tricks of the things, how you can undergo your modernization.
First thing maybe just to cover is, why are we still using these 5250 screens? Well, way back in the 70s, we ended up with this fantastic machine, this 5250 terminal, that really was sort of a progression from cards, from printed punched cards, right? And it allowed for some really good standardization for screen design. It was simple to program too for business applications, and really it was sort of the height of its technology at the time. Windows showed up eventually, and then Windows 3.1 to mouse and pointers and everything, and so we figured out that you know what, we could create a terminal emulator, emulate a 5250 terminal in our Windows machine, so that you could be using well, maybe at the time, not so much Excel, but like a VisiCalc or something like that, running your business and everything alongside your 5250 application, and copy and paste between the two environments and everything. So it was like one machine, and you could run all your applications, whether they're Windows or 5250, Windows or IBM I. And then several things happened in the meantime, but today we're sitting around and we're working with web applications. And we've got, I don't think anybody has these 5250 terminals anymore, but for sure, there's a lot of people using terminal emulators in their Windows environments. And they're wondering, how do we get from that to what modern applications look like and work like today? And there's a bunch of different ways to do that. And that's part of what we're looking at today. So, how are those old applications, the 5250 applications created? Well, they were generally what we call monolithic applications. So you might have, say, a very large 10,000 line RPG program working against a database on your AS400 or System 38 or whatever it was at the time. And that worked with the 5250 screen. So very simple environment, but at the same time, when we start looking at what Windows and web can do, it's somewhat limiting and kind of strange to the people who are growing up now with a web environment with devices in their hands or tablets and things like that. So just noting here that really that interface was just 24 lines, 80 columns, or 27 lines and 132 columns. So really it was a limited interface, which was good for standardization, but bad for getting a lot more information in the hands of a user all at once. So next slide, please. So today, how do these applications look? Well, today we're looking sort of more in kind of like a model view controller type environment, where we have one part of a program that has to do with getting the data from the database and arranging the data from the database or updating the data in the database. Another layer, which might be all that business logic, the transactions. How do we handle the transactions? What is that workflow that goes along with that? So you might actually be interfacing with a workflow tool also. And then there's the presentation layer is, well, how do we take those business transactions and how do we display them, interact with the user so that they can cause those transactions to occur or to witness what transactions have occurred, looking like inquiries or updates or data entry type functionality into a graphical user interface. Next slide, please. So what are some of the parts to these things, or what are some of the characteristics of these types of applications? Well, The applications today are very, very componentized. So instead of having this monolithic application that's 10,000 lines long, you might have, 50, 100, hundreds of smaller components that are all combined together to create a larger application. So they're simpler to maintain on their own and reusable across multiple applications. And data access, as in we saw in that model view controller kind of picture in the last screen, we segregated that data access. So we're not dealing with, oh, how do we handle the ODBC for this kind of database, or how do we handle the custom access to this other kind of database? How do we get at IBM I data and things like that, the DB2400 data and everything? The business logic, is in its own layer, also in presentation in its own layer. Basically, the MVC model view controller kind of environment. We also have down, if we look at the bottom here, built on it's all built on industry patterns. So the kind of standardization that we had in the old 5250 environment, and some very good applications are still being written for 5250. So because it's such a great programming environment. But those same types of standards that we were able to accomplish in the 5250 world, now we're doing also in the Windows and web world to make things much easier to create in a standardized way, so that programmers aren't inventing artwork every single time they sit down to create something, and so that different programmers can work on the same applications rather than having one programmer assigned to a particular application and then they move on to some other project and then no one knows how that worked. And also so that users could work with that application and not have to be trained in detail. Oh, here's a whole new kind of interface for you. And then you have to sit down and spend 3 days learning how to use that interface. And then they give you another application. It's a whole other kind of interface. So these industry standards start to come into play to catch up to the kinds of standards that we had in place for the 5250 world. Next slide, please.
Well, so you want to keep legacy applications. Why would you want to keep those? Well, if we really get into the details of how our organizations, business work, they all rely on processes, people, and technology. And technology is a very important key piece in our strategies and how it works. So software that has been here forever, like 20 years, 15 years, are still supporting our mission critical operations. They have proven to be reliable, and perhaps they weren't reliable at first, but we made them reliable by iterations in software development cycles. And also something very important is that we baked in our competitive advantage in these information systems. So perhaps something that makes us unique is already embedded in these information systems. And for sure, these are very cost effective. If you compare it with new applications we want to deploy. Why? Because we have already paid for them. There's a lot of investment throughout so many years. And whenever we are going to deploy a new application, those costs rise in ways we wouldn't even compare it with an application is already being working. So in reality, if we really think from a business side perspective, you really cannot afford the cost of a complete replacement. You have invested so much. Everyone's already trained, and a lot of perhaps vendors are already, they make use of these information systems. So this is not an easy task by any means.
So given that we have created all those great applications and we don't want to spend all the money to replace them, say, or maybe we are replacing order, but the real key is that as time went on, we need to do more things with that. So how do, what is it that we need to do? Well, some of the things might be that we need to be able to get information from not just our DB2 400 database, but maybe from other kinds of database, Windows databases and Unix databases, et cetera, a whole bunch of different places. And also, there's a whole new business, that might have been an angle to the business that we might not have had before, or that we didn't have before, which is e-commerce. So how do you take your 5250 application, your RPG monolithic application, and how do you move that towards today's e-commerce worlds? I mean, we started doing that, back in the 90s with EDI and things like that. Well, maybe not started, but we were well, on our way in that. But it kind of shifted to, instead of like a business to business model, to maybe also a business to consumer type model also. So things were changing. How do we do all that? Another thing that's that we might need to do is, well, okay, so we've got these 10,000 line programs and everything, but we're also adding in all these augmented capabilities and everything. How do we maintain that? Because that's going to be a lot more lines of code and everything like that. So application modularization, creating those smaller pieces, those reusable pieces, so that that are reusable across different applications, not just one application, for ease of maintenance and also for just a better design capability, and also to be able to take an application that was our legacy application that we didn't want to replace. Maybe we want to, suddenly now we're finding that we want to put these on people's cell phones or on a tablet, so that our vendors or our own warehouse people can be, walking around and finding all the product, or understanding, what the product levels are like in the warehouses, et cetera. So that's another thing that might have come up also. And then just overall, how do we grow the quality of the software that we have already, especially when we're comparing it to maybe our competition or different divisions that we've added to our business. So there's a lot of things that suddenly we kind of find out we've got a great application, but there's things that we need to add on in addition to what we already had.
So let's talk a little bit about the drivers that are making the case for modernization. So as you may see, the agility of the business is something that it's far more important nowadays than it used to be before. Right now, it is all about the economy on demand, what we call the omni-channel strategies. And as you can see, more than 6 trillion by 2024, it is what we would expect about this big explosion of economy. So in reality, it's not that, it doesn't mean that we are all going to do e-commerce, for sure not, but we're going to be part of this revolution, either as vendors, as consumers, or perhaps as we would have some kind of adjacencies, such as, well, users are demanding fast and easy application experiences. And we'll have to deliver them because it's already in place. It is pretty easy right now to send money to another bank user quite easily, to avoid so many ways of transferring money to a person. So this is a big situation we have to handle. And the other thing is, as well, I guess time crunch is something that companies want to, it is pretty much what companies are looking for, right now, time is money, speed is life, as how many companies say. So business not only expect, technology platforms to help you code faster, they want to deploy right away with a lot of functionality that is out of the box. And this is something that is very important. The time to market for our new applications and even previous applications it's mind cracking. So right now we're gonna move another thing that we are being pressured with labor pinch. If we really think about what the COVID pandemic has brought up, is that we have a lot of shortages in resources in in a lot of means. It's not. It is perhaps we might have the people, but we don't even have uh, the supply chain in order to make it happen. So whenever we are having a problem with people and we want them to do more because there isn't a lot of workers there and we want to continue keeping the service levels all the way we have, it is very important that we consider this and think of it. A 52 training people in 50 to 50 screens, just as Andrew mentioned, it scares to death all the new generations that are coming to that are getting into work nowadays. So let's see the challenges we have as business. So we all as business want to offer a modern user experience. We all want to go web and support newer devices and making sure everything's connected. But let's face it, you cannot afford to break your current processes. Those processes are there for some reason. It takes you a lot of time to build those. And certainly you don't want to train workers over and over. And attrition rates, especially at operational levels in every company, is very high. So you have to train them over and over and over. So whenever you are going with a 50 to 50 screens and taking them to train them is not an easy task. Also, you don't want to throw away your investments of years. It's like throwing the baby out with the tub, and I don't think it's a wise investment. You have put a lot of money on that, and it is pretty likely that you don't want to throw that away. It is pretty likely that's one of the reasons you're so successful. So I guess nobody wants to throw away the secret sauce. And certainly it's all about the bottom line. You don't want to spend a lot of money in making all these changes, in order to provide that. Perhaps you have already streamlined your applications. Everything's working fine. You have no problems whatsoever. So to take my application to offer a modern user experience and go web and support newer devices, I think it's a no.
So we've gone through a little bit about, well, what's the history of this technology or these technologies that we've built our legacy applications in, and some of the environments that we're trying to mold that application into. We looked at some of the challenges as to, or value, what's some of the value of that application, the fact that it's, it defines what your business is, and it contains that, what a lot of people call the secret sauce of your business also. And then we looked at, well, how is it that we need to augment that application, to be a better application, more maintainable, and how, and how that's going to be advantageous to the programmers and to the users and to your customers. So we looked at all of that, but now it's like, well, how do we do that? Well, there's a number of different ways that we can do that. And, one of them is, first of many is refacing. So what is refacing? It's, you might call it screen scraping or something like that, right? So actually, if we can go back to that other slide, Jose. So, one might be, refacing, which is kind of like a screen scraper, decorating the screen to make your 5250 screen more colorful, more mouse and pointer friendly, so that it can blend in with the web and Windows types application that you use on your desktop day to day. Another way of modernizing an application is all, maybe in addition to these can all, most of these can be used together, not just like, oh, I can only do refacing or just add new user interfaces. But I may want to also add more functionality by creating a new user interface, not just refacing an existing one, but adding new ones also to my application. Of course, that means you also have to figure out how you're going to make them all look the same and everything too, so that the user doesn't have to retrain themselves or go in shock that, oh, I just went from a green on black to a colorful screen or something. So, there's some work behind that. Another way also is when you're maybe writing new components, is to group the functionality in your legacy application into callable services. APIs, for example, today some of the newest versions of APIs would be REST APIs, right? So maybe exposing them as REST APIs, for example, for other organizations or for your own organization's programmers to join together into more functional, more graphical type applications. And then there's some business things too that you can do. Like, oh, well, Jose, what are some of the other things we can do here also?
So let's talk a little bit about refacing. I believe this is the first technique out of a Modernization an IT manager quiver, So it's as Andrew mentioned, this is what normally it's called as in the industry jargon as screen scraping. So screen scraping is the name of this modernization technique that uses the original screen and presents it in a graphical way as an application or in a browser. This technique moves the original screen content, layout, and the operation into the presentation form. As you can see in this figure, you can see the legacy application modernized with a screen scraping tool, as I have here. So the tool sits between the legacy application and the display device. That, as you can see here, I have some arrows, as you can see, it is showing the actual application, the reface application into the screen and having the input through its keyboard. So as mentioned, the tool sits between the legacy application and the display device. It captures the screen instructions from the legacy application and converts them into this type of display.
So Jose, I would imagine that one of the great things about this type of modernization is that you don't really have to touch that legacy application. All that stuff that you put into it, all that money, all that time, and all that special sauce or secret sauce that you put into that legacy application, you don't have to replace it or touch it. Yeah.
That's right. The legacy application operates on change. So in most cases, the legacy application is even unaware of the change in the way people are viewing the screen. So you don't need, in this particular case, you don't even need the source code. So you are not going to do any changes of that. But that's also, so that means we're only achieving modernization only at the level of the user interface or the presentation layer.
So what could that look like, Jose?
So I think if you have this 50-50 screen, it could be turned into something like this. So,
and that's probably a very simple version of what it could look like, right? I imagine so too.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is a, let's call it a tactical way of change your application. This is not going to be a game changer. It might be a game changer for a lot of people, but it's not for everyone. So as you can see, one of the best things about this terminal emulation is that it allows you to access the web with lower cost and lower risk. So think about
the refacing does that. The refacing does that, but that's a problem that terminal emulation doesn't really give you good access to the web, right? Whereas refacing, because you're pushing that out to a web browser in the most part, right? you're obviously then giving access to web functionality also, where terminal emulation wouldn't have had that.
Absolutely.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, and
Same
you
thing,
don't have
terminal
to
emulation.
install them everywhere. This is something that is
Right.
going to be, it's a native web application that is
Right.
running on your browser. You don't have to install anything, not to run
Terminal
it
emulation.
VPNs.
Terminal emulation has very little capability for improving the appearance, other than maybe just changing some colors, maybe the background colors and the foreground colors, and maybe turning the command keys into buttons or something like that. But refacing gives you a lot more flexibility in that area, to move things around, to not just change the fonts and colors, but to actually throw on graphics, interface it with maybe pictures of products that that you're inquiring on or something like that. So all of that can be interfaced in there also. And then there's
sure. Sorry.
No, go on. Yeah.
No, and I think one of the biggest situations in which companies that are using terminal emulation are being pressured is they want to reduce the transaction costs, the training cost, the employee turnover, the licensing scheme. Perhaps there are companies that have already enterprise licensing, but you have to install those. So IT is also does have to get involved into that. It may sound simple, but if we magnify it for every employee that is using these information systems, it is going to be a difficult one.
Yeah,
and
imagine
also,
if you had 1,000 employees, you have to deploy that terminal emulator 1,000 times. So yes.
Yeah, and not to forget, there are security problems everywhere. Patching all those information, those remote systems is not an easy task. Let's call it adds another degree in your infrastructure instead of your applications, So even people from the infrastructure side would come up and said, well, why don't you support this? Because I have to, this is part of my KPIs. Certainly you are using it to deal with your information system. So it's an important thing.
So of course, time to market, delivering these applications to new users, internal, external, is greatly reduced also using a refacing approach as opposed to just terminal emulation. So yeah, so there's huge differences between terminal emulation and simple or complex refacing. A lot of advantages in refacing, but again, it's not the only thing that you can do. So adding new user interfaces, that was another approach to modernization, which is really saying, all right, I'm going to take the legacy application, use that screenscaping tool, that refacing tool, but have a method where I'm scraping just the information off that screen to create, or maybe multiple screens or something, to create a whole new user interface for the user. So it's not really just screen scraping anymore. You're now adding new functionality, new user interfaces, new screens, new pages to the application that don't even look remotely, or may not even work remotely like the original application did. It's still the legacy application, working away, but the user interface is interacting with it differently than it did before when it was just pure screen scraping, right? So here's an example where we went from 5250 emulation to simple screen scraping. Of course, we can dress it up a lot. And then now we're moving, when we're creating a new user interface, is we're enhancing it. If you can just advance that next little window there, where we're adding new functionality, right? So we're breaking up, we're bringing in some more information. We're breaking up the information a little bit differently. And we're doing things like, value add things like saying, hey, you know what? On the bill to and ship to addresses, let's show, a Google map of what, where those addresses are, right? And of course, if we can do Google map of where those addresses are, we can also feed that into, say, our shipping department to have them create routes that are, more easily create routes using external software through Google APIs to to handle navigation and things like that, multi-point navigation and everything. So there's a lot of things you can do when you start to manipulate the plain screen scrapes interface to a new interface with new capabilities. And then there's the API approach, right? Exposing the functionality in the legacy application as callable services. So there's using various different techniques, you can turn parts of your legacy application into web services of some sort, like a REST API or something like that, callable APIs for a whole new application to make use of. So when you're creating this new application, you're not creating everything from scratch. All you're doing is saying, here is going to be the user interface I'm going to have for a new set of users, either my vendors or my suppliers or my customers or our own internal people. And instead of having to rewrite all that logic that's sitting in that legacy application and risking that I'm not going to get it quite right, because you can imagine manufacturing or even some inventory schemes also, they're very difficult to replicate. I wonder how many programmers really understand the full ramifications of trying to rewrite a manufacturing application. That might be tough to do. So in this case, what we can do is we can carve out pieces of that functionality and expose those as APIs that then other programmers can say, okay, we're going to collect these APIs, put it into and calls to these APIs, put it into a new application with its own new user interface, and deliver the functionality that way, right? So now you're sort of slicing and dicing your legacy application into not just the navigation that you used to have when it was just screen scraping, but now more a case of like kind of a la carte functionality that other programmers can use.
And also something very important, I guess, Andrew, that this is, although it's not a simple technique, you're not just you're not just modernizing the presentation layer. You can actually do a lot of interactions with other applications and even other APIs. It's a non-limiting approach that allows you to grow your application in many ways. So it's your legacy application in which you keep all your business processes the way it has been working for so long, but at the same time, you can augment these capabilities in ways that screen scraping, refacing, or just adding a new unified interface is not going to solve. Yeah, so I think this is a very good, as we're moving, and as you can see, we're moving toward more strategic ways of thought in modernization techniques.
And yet still using our legacy applications.
So I'm going to talk about other options that are available for different organizations that they would like to modernize their applications. I would call them other options because they normally are not right out of bat, let's say, solutions that leverage all your investment in the most, let's say, cost-effective way. So when we're talking about migration, it is a technique where you move or replace discrete blocks of functionality in the legacy application to one or more other applications. So that means you can migrate one part of the application and you can move all of it. It is a very good, let's say, technique if you're willing to invest on it. But and as you can do it step by step on your own pace, it is going to be a very, let's say, strategic way of doing so. So whenever we're talking about rehosting, this involves moving legacy applications to another computing platform while retaining the business functions of the application. The legacy applications and their environment operate unchanged, but the underlying computer hardware, operating systems, and to some extent middleware are new. But at the same time, although it seems like, wow, we're just changing, I don't have to handle this information system within my four walls of the of my data center. One of the biggest problems with this one is that it is just changing where your application runs. It may be running in a managed service provider or in a cloud vendor. But definitely one of the biggest problems with this is that they don't take advantage of other modernization techniques. It doesn't go web. It's just hosted in a different place. It is not going to allow you to grow in different ways than you used to do. So rehosting, it is pretty likely there are cost reasons for doing that. Perhaps you don't have your personnel that has been taking care of those servers, or perhaps you don't have so many of them, and the cost of keeping them in-house is very expensive. So this leads to talk about outsourcing. So it's somehow similar, but outsourcing is a technique that retains the legacy application as an operational entity, and the outsourcing company assumes a responsibility for day-to-day operations, maintenance, and enhancements. So this seems like a very good idea, and it is a very good idea, but think of it that you're giving away your intellectual property. So when you give this thing to someone else, to a different entity, you're losing the advantage. I don't think it's bad, but I think you have to be very careful on which kind of processes you're going to outsource. Otherwise, I think you might be able to combine it with something else. So when we're talking about rewriting the legacy application, or re-architecturing, they're also called, the legacy application involves in a software development project to build a new application using modern technologies, both software development tools and deployment options. So let's say that exactly the same application you're going to rewrite it completely and create it in a new architecture. Of course, one of the caveats of this is that rewriting a whole application, it is going to take you a long time. Normally, these kind of projects, they take years to be able to be finished, and it takes a long time. But it's certainly it's worth a shot, but in the sense that you might be able to add new functionality, something that you wouldn't be able to do with, for instance, screen scraping, but you would do with other options. So it is worth to make a very good assessment of the plans. And then the next one is replacing. So the application, well, the legacy application is going to be retired, and another application that perhaps it is purchased or acquired to replace that functionality. For example, you might want to replace the general ledger application with a commercial off-the-shelf financial software, or they also go with other names right now, like software as a service or as best of breed. And I think it's worth a try, but let's think of it. This is only for non-critical applications. So if we really think about all these applications, it is really funny because unfortunately, when we're talking about other options, your chances of success are quite small, especially if you don't have a very good project management, and if you're not willing to undergo uh, a lot of changes that is going to change the way your whole application, your whole, not just your whole application. Let's think about your whole company, because it is pretty likely that it's going to impact though where it matters. So is there really a one size fits all for all this? In reality, if we really want to summarize all these techniques we mentioned, you can pretty much uh, define it in 4 blocks. So in terms of business value and how mission critical those applications should be, if we retire and replace with commercial off-the-shelf servers, let's say that means that it's in the lowest business, it offers the lowest business value, but they should be on the lowest part of mission criticality. So if you really want to change something that provides a lot of business value, but it's mission critical, I don't think you are doing the right thing, and this applies to all of these ones. So one thing that you might be able to do is maintain with minimal modernization, such as the refacing technique. This would provide some business value, but I don't think you would like to have this as mission critical. With the advantages of refacing and with this kind of modernization is that if you have some of your users are still using your 50 to 50 screens and they want to use it, they can still use it. They don't have to do a lot of changes. So whenever they're doing screen scraping, those users will be using and affecting the same thing. But let's face it, it is not going to change the needle by any means. It was proven to be very successful during times such as the COVID pandemic, in which a lot of knowledge workers had access in their at the comfort of their homes. So whenever we get into the next step, that we're talking about rewriting and migration. So yeah, the business value is there. There's a lot of criticality in the functionality in these applications, and it is pretty good. But unfortunately, it does not. It is going to take you a lot of time and a lot of resources to get there. So, in our opinion, modernizing, enhancing, and maintaining those applications that have been working for so many years, and you just add them an additional functionality, it is going to take you're going to reap the most benefits out of it. So you're going to combine your investments in your 50 to 50 screens. You may have perhaps 2,000 of them, but at the same time, you might be able to provide a lot of business value and continue in growing and adopting new business models.
Now, here's an area we could spend easily a couple hours on, but Jose, maybe we'll just spend a couple minutes on this, right?
Absolutely. so I guess
at least to get them out.
Absolutely. So first of all, you have to know your applications. Doing an application inventory is something very important. Not only all the applications that you have, but also trying to understand what's beneath that. Who built it? Is the code worth upgrading? Is the business value it brings worth upgrading?
Maybe it needs to be rewritten. Maybe
Absolutely.
Parts of your application do need to be written. We're not saying that you can't rewrite anything. I think we're just suggesting that there's a lot of different ways to handle modernization.
And then, well, you might be able to choose a project that provides real business value. So if you're going to do something that is not going to move the needle, I believe there's simply no point in doing that. Perhaps you might be able just to replace it.
Yeah, and definitely you do want to start with something. And maybe not necessarily the most complex project either, but start somewhere, but something that does provide some real business value so the users can provide feedback, valuable feedback. Also, avoid adding graphical user interface for cosmetic reasons. In other words, if the only reason you're trying to modernize an application is because you want that button to be red, that's kind of an inside joke for all the people who used to watch those old IBM commercials when they went to the web. If the only reason that you're doing this is to make that button red, maybe you got to reevaluate. Did you choose the right project that that provides real business value? So.
Yeah, and also it's very important that you determine the most appropriate strategy. You may need more than one. It is pretty likely that you will need more than one. I don't think there's one way of doing things. It is pretty likely that it will be a combination of techniques, tools, and perhaps people. You may even think, I would like to use these tools to do that and do it with my own people. Or you can go with another vendor and ask them to do it for you, or a combination of both. There are no rules in this, and it may bring, or even combining techniques, it would even bring more value out of it. So, and most important is you should be modernizing. Your modernization project has to be related to business processes. If it's non-related to business processes, it is pretty likely that it's not going to move the needle at all. And when we're talking about moving the needle, and one of the reasons people go and companies decide to modernize, it can be narrowed down to two reasons. One is because you want to increase revenue streams, or you want to reduce costs. This applies also to modernization.
Also, when you're choosing a modernization process, because one of the reasons that you're doing modernization is not just to provide a different user interface or to reach out to your consumers or your vendors or your suppliers or anything like that. That's not the only reason. One of the other reasons also is to improve your application development team also. So their skills are enhanced and they can create new applications better or enhance the applications better more quickly with higher levels of quality also. So you want to make sure that that the projects and the tools that you select also enhance, if you've got developers in-house, that it also enhances the developer skills. Also, if you happen to keep that legacy application, right? A lot of the stuff that maybe is there is maybe not really usable, in a really sort of high-end internet application, browser application or something. So you've got to keep in mind that not everything that you have in your legacy application is going to work in the new world, right? A lot of it will, probably most of it will. But if you're looking at just repurposing that application, realize that maybe not all parts of that application are going to be reused. So don't necessarily try to use them, everything within your legacy applications. Also, if you're choosing a vendor, as Jose said, maybe you might rewrite part of an application. You might choose a vendor with a product that does certain things like refacing or whatever else. Make sure that whatever they're saying really is what you think they're saying, right? Because they're gonna use words that sound great, and but the thing is that they know their products the way they think that that those products should be implemented, and so it takes a little bit of homework for us to sit down and look at all these different vendors, all these different tools, and work with them, right, in an honest and open, environment, to say, here are the things that we need, and then the vendor has that option to, that opportunity there to say, well, here are the things that, of all those things that you need, here are the things that we can do, and then somehow come up with something like a proof of concept or something that allows them to demonstrate to you that, here, what you thought we were going to give you, we really are giving you, right? So you really do want to, understand that, the vendors you're looking at, you're not just looking at their website and looking at the list of features that they have and sort of go, okay, that's it, that's our vendor. You got to do a lot more homework than that. So that's another thing for sure. I would recommend highly. So.
Absolutely. And well, modernization is not a one-time. It's an ongoing assessment to test if your applications are still suitable for your business needs. In the end, a lot of people think, I already modernized my application. That's an unlikely, perhaps you might have modernized a certain application, but that's an ongoing process, because once you modernize that application, it's already relevant for future workloads. So it's pretty likely that you will like to continue assess if that application if it continues to suit the business needs. And last but not least, doing nothing is really a viable option. In reality is that if you think that doing nothing is going to be a good option, it is rarely the case. It might be frightening for a lot of companies that have a big problem with sorting out enough resources to do that, but if the patient's sick, it's going to get worse.
Look, we went through a whole list earlier on in the presentation of a bunch of different reasons why you might need to modernize your legacy application. And I can hardly imagine, doing nothing is rarely a viable option. I can hardly imagine any business that can continue moving forward, given all those critical things that are happening in the market, trying to tap into that, that 3-point-something trillion e-commerce area. How are you going to do that with no modernization of any sort? So one way or another, it's like we're saying here, rarely a viable option. Although a 5250 application doing inventory and shipping a shipping application out in a warehouse might be great. But taking, say, a 5250 application and saying, oh, okay, we're going to use that so that we're going to give that out to our consumers to order products. Maybe that's not a great way to or even a vendor.
Or even a vendor.
Might not be such a great idea. Right. So
even vendors, it's pretty unlikely that they will be happy continue using this kind of. It could be also a matter of image for the company.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay. So as we're running out of time, and we would like to answer some questions. We would like to jump into the Q&A section. Actually, you have a box in which on the lower part of your screen that says Q&A, and you might be able to send us some questions. And actually we can answer one of them. They're asking that many times that they cannot complete containerization for whole applications, but touch some small parts with fails in performance. If there's any guideline or best practices on our side. So what they're asking about being partially containerized, they're talking about rehosting and partially use platform as a service. I know if you want to take that one, Andrew.
Well, I can take a stab at that one, right? So definitely in certain kinds of say refacing, in certain types of refacing, where we're exposing an application as a part, parts of an application as APIs, maybe like as REST APIs or other types of callable APIs, then that's an area where maybe part of your application you're delivering in a web environment, say, right, and containerized and everything, but other parts of the application you might add in screens, right, add in new pages in there, or add parts of the page that makes calls to these other APIs, right? And then some of those APIs, so some of those APIs may be part of that legacy application, calling pieces of that legacy application, but some of those APIs may be whole net new functionality or rewritten functionality. You say, hey, we could call that API, but it's been performing poorly, so we're going to, because it performed poorly in the legacy application, so we're going to rewrite that piece of the logic somewhere else, right? So there are opportunities to then mix and match through an API approach with a refaced application, mixing and matching different APIs with some refaced parts of the application, containerized applications, especially in the API approach, using the API approach, where you can then mix and match well-performing portions of an application along with rewritten or enhanced portions of an application that maybe were not performing very well or were not quite doing what you needed them to do. Hopefully that answered that question. But I think I was Andrew, on the right track.
I guess we have a lot of questions, but we don't have a lot of time. And
no.
So what I can do is I'm going to gather all the questions and make them answers offline. But thank you very much for attending to this webinar. I am Jose Caso.
And with me I'm Andrew Vaiciunas.
And we're happy and thank you very much for being able to share for sharing our thoughts with you. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you very much.